Hello, day 6 of 100 Grammar with Mariia. Today we are going to work with negative sentences, how you make negative sentences. In the previous videos, we talked about auxiliary verbs, how you ask questions, how you make these types of questions, these types of questions. So it's time to speak a little bit more about negative sentences. You can make negative sentences in two ways. You can use some special words that show already the meaning of this word is negative. So when you say never, it means, for example, I never do this. It means that you do not do this at all. So in fact, this word already shows you this negation. And the sentence is already negative. So some students can make mistakes when they have already one of these words like never, nothing, nowhere, no one, nobody, none, neither, nor. When they have these words, they add another not. They cannot do that. And it's very important to remember that. No double negation. Let's say you say no only once, and it should be understood already. Sometimes you can find double negation in literary texts, but it's not about that. In grammar, we should think like that, one only negation. So one more time, if you want to make a negative sentence, you can use one of the words, but not always. What always works is to make a negative sentence with the help of auxiliary verb. We have talked about these kinds of verbs. They help us to ask questions and make negative sentences. And how we find these auxiliary verbs? Step number 1, if you see any of the forms of these verbs, be, have, can, must, shall, will, may, ought to, and forms of these verbs, you use them. But if you do not have any of these forms, what do you do? No word, think about.
Do, does, and did.
You're right. So you have only these 3 options left. You're right. Sometimes you can have a word have and make a negative sentence both with do and have. So it happens only when you have one word have. But if you have 2 words, you have to make negation with the help of have. But we'll talk about that a little bit more when we work with the perfect tenses. So, auxiliary verbs, these are the verbs that we can use. And now we need to try and make these negative sentences. So here I have these examples. The first one is, I will read this again. Step number 1, what is step number 1?
Looking for auxiliary.
Yes, you're right, looking for auxiliary verb. So I'll write it here in these parentheses. We read the sentence, I will read this again. Do you have any of the words we've mentioned here or their forms?
And will.
Will, you're right. Here we have this auxiliary verb, and of course we have this verb. So we'll read. This tiny word will shows us that the action is in the future, will be in the future. I will read this again. Later, maybe in a day, tomorrow, in a week. You have found will, you're right. So I write it down here. Step number 2. When you make a negation with the help of this auxiliary verb, you have to add not to this auxiliary verb. And we've talked about these short forms, how you spell these short forms already in the previous video. So today I won't focus on that. So I will read this again. How to make this sentence negative, a negative one?
I won't read this.
Yes, very good. You know these forms are in the previous video as well. So you can say, I will not, or these 2 words the same as won't. We have this not, and we have will. I will not, or I won't read this again. Let's see, can we make any negative sentence with the help of one of these words? I will read this again.
I will never read this again.
You're right. Look, we can fill in another word here. We can add another word here. I will never read this again. It was horrible. You mean? So here we have this word never. We can use it. Should I say I will never not read this again?
No.
No, it's either or. Either you use not or you use never. But not to these negations. No double negation in the sentence. Very good. Now we have sentence number 2. Do this. Work hard, let's say. Do this. This is a tricky one, to be honest. Step number 1. What do we do to make a negative sentence?
Looking for auxiliary verbs.
Auxiliary verbs, always the same, you're right? Let's see. Do we have any of these forms? Like Emmys are, have, has, was, were. We can have had, can, could, must, shall, should, will, would, may, might, ought to. Do you have any of these words here?
No.
No. So what do you need to do?
The word do.
Do. So now you see, you have the verb do, and we have an auxiliary verb, which is do. How do we make a negation here?
Not.
We add not. Should I say only do not this?
Don't do this.
Don't do this. So what do? We have to repeat this verb twice. So in the first case, I'll delete that. Let me do this. So we have don't do this. We repeat the same, but in this first case, we have an auxiliary verb. We make a negation here, and then do just as verb, meaning doing something. Don't do this. Very good. There is one more word I wanted to talk about. This is the word hardly, which have already this, again, negation. It means that something doesn't exist or is not there. So this word hardly has this meaning. Look at this quote. Working hard or hardly working. You will have this word hardly working. Working hard, we understand. Hardly working. This part means that you almost do not work at all. This is the meaning. So hardly has this negative meaning, almost nothing. So that's why hardly has this already negative meaning, and it belongs to this list of these words. But we don't have any no, ne, never. That's why it's difficult to identify these words. But one of them is hardly, and all other words on the board are easy to identify. You see they start with N, like never, no one, neither, nowhere, and so on. Thank you. Practice at home with making these negative sentences and write at least 5 negative sentences using different auxiliary verbs or any of these words. Thank you.